All right, welcome to Scriptwriting. Today we're going to quickly walk through how you can take a beneficiary story and apply it to the hero's journey story structure. We've highlighted what we'll discuss today in some of our other courses, but in this course we'll go into a little bit more detail and show you how you can ask the right questions in your interviews and get the right information from your beneficiaries in order to fit their stories into the time-tested hero's journey structure. So my name is Zach Layton. In 2011, I founded a nonprofit creative agency called Reliant Creative. We started the agency with the belief that God is working in powerful ways globally, and that if we could tell those stories, we could inspire action and mobilize the church. Today, we're going to focus our attention on script writing, as I've already said, but we've spent a little time both in our story-driven messaging course and our pre-production documentary storytelling course, walking through what we'll discuss in this course today. But I wanted to create a course specifically for script writing so that we could go into greater detail and kind of share the process as its own standalone piece of content that can be applied in circumstances where there may not be a film or a messaging strategy tied to the story. Now, this will absolutely work for those cases where you are creating a film, but what we learn in this course will apply directly to taking a beneficiary's story and applying it to the hero's journey to come away with a script that can be used in any medium, whether that's written form or an email campaign or a film itself. So there's a great deal of value in sharing stories in written form with your ministry partners, right? It's not always financially feasible to tell stories via video, so I wanted to create some content that will help you write a beneficiary story on paper so you can have a succinct and effective story to send to ministry headquarters. Oftentimes ministries look for stories from their national partners, and what they get back is a long, multi-page story that doesn't follow any real structure. So this course is designed to help you guys take a beneficiary story, write it down in a succinct and clear way, fit it into a story structure that is going to engage an audience emotionally, and then be able to send that story to ministry headquarters so that they can then use it and plug it into their marketing materials and campaigns. Video can be time consuming, right? So being able to write down a story of a beneficiary's transformed life in written form that can be paired with an image or shared to a donor base, that's going to bring immense value to ministry headquarters. So you may want to someday circle back and tell those stories via video, but there's value in simply sharing the story now, just in written form. So now, before we get into this course, I do want to communicate that this is a basic script writing course. We will be focusing on script writing structure and the structure that we follow, rather than the creative writing itself. So there are literally thousands of ways to be creative with your words. So this course is not designed to be a course to help you write beautifully crafted scripts and creatively crafted scripts, but rather a course dedicated to helping you fit stories into a structure so that you can tell stories more often. So we encourage you to get as creative as you can with your words and write simply and succinctly as possible with your words. But this is not a course to help you in the creativity part of the process. We simply want to give you a tool and a structure that you can follow so that you can share more stories with greater efficiency and regularity. Remember, one of our goals is greater regularity with our content output. I've said this multiple times before, and written stories can be a great way to fill in the gaps between your maybe 3 or 4 times a year video productions. As always, the content in this course is not my own, but rooted in Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Some of what we'll discuss takes similar structure to Monroe's motivated sequence and Donald Miller's story structures, using the hero's journey as his work that they do at Story Brand. So we'll spend a little time looking at Donald Miller's version, or we spend a lot of time looking at Donald Miller's version in other courses, but we're going to spend a majority of this course today focusing on Dan Harmon's version of the hero's journey, which he calls the story circle. So remember back to our storytelling course. I said that the reason we like to encourage ministries to follow a structure is because it allows them to plug and play and create content with greater regularity. If you have a structure that you can plug your stories into or filter your stories through, you'll be able to push content out with greater regularity. And since the hero's journey is a story arc that all humans live through and engage with across cultures, it's the perfect structure to follow because you can guarantee it'll emotionally engage an audience. So as we are script writing and following a structure to do so, keep in mind why it's important. Following the structure is going to help you create content quicker. The hero's journey is a structure that relates to all humans across all cultures. So we can almost be guaranteed that our stories will relate to our audiences because this story structure has related to all cultures for thousands of years. And then lastly, for our written storytelling, we're going to be using Dan Harmon's version specifically, just like we did in our video production and our documentary storytelling courses. It's a little bit more involved and follows the hero's journey, the original Joseph Campbell version, more closely than Donald Miller's version. And when we can, it's helpful to be more true to the original hero's journey structure. All right, so if you'll remember from our pre-production course, we mentioned that we would walk through this process in detail in this course and specifically show you how a beneficiary's story can fit into this structure really well. So once we've done that, we'll spend some time showing how you can tailor and structure your interview questions to pull the right answers from your character or from your subject in an interview or conversation setting. Again, this does not have to be an interview that takes place in front of a camera. These questions can simply be used when we're learning a beneficiary's story in a conversational or interview-like setting. All right, so let's walk through the structure showing how a beneficiary's story can fit into this structure really well. So we start at U, or step one, with a character in an ordinary world. So in this example, we'll start with a beneficiary who is stuck in human trafficking and they want out. Now you might say that's not an ordinary world, that's a terrible and awful world, right? The ordinary world simply represents the world that the character knows or is familiar with. It's the world that they are accustomed to. But in this story, they are tired of that world and the world that they live in, and they want out of human trafficking, right? They want to get out of their ordinary world. Even for the rest of us, even though that is not an ordinary world, it is ordinary for the beneficiary. So we've just established the character, and now we arrive at step two, which is the need. The character needs to get out of human trafficking. That is what the character wants. Something isn't right with their ordinary world. Now, I'm going to add a couple steps for the ministry sector that come from the original Joseph Campbell version of the hero's journey. So steps 2A and steps 2B are not included in Dan Harmon's version or his story circle, but they are included in Joseph Campbell's original structure. If you go back to our storytelling course, you'll see these two pieces are a part of Joseph Campbell's original 17-step process. So in 2A, the character meets a mentor or a guide. So for Luke Skywalker, I use this example all the time in Star Wars. For Luke Skywalker, that was Obi-Wan Kenobi. So Joseph Campbell called this the supernatural aid. In this example story, the character is going to meet your ministry. Your ministry is going to be the guide or the mentor for your beneficiary. So in the same way your ministry is the guide in the donor story, you are the guide or the mentor to the character in this story. And as the mentor, you are going to call them to adventure in step 2. And so those two pieces, those are additives, again, to Dan Harmon's version. But I think they're important within the ministry space to not leave out. So your ministry calls this character or this beneficiary in this example story, you call them out of their ordinary world or the world that they know and are accustomed to. You call them out of human trafficking, and the character accepts the call and decides to go on an adventure in step 3. Step 3, the character accepts that call to adventure. Dan Harmon calls that go. Now the character has entered the special world. They've left their ordinary world, the world that they're accustomed to. They've entered the special world. They've entered a world that they are not accustomed to, right? This is different than what they know. We've entered Act 2 of the story, and the character's world, or their life, will never be the same. Their world is changed and transformed and turned upside down. This is a major step for the character. In step 4, or search, your character is looking for the thing that they set out to find, which in this story is freedom from human trafficking. But in this process, they might run into difficult challenges or obstacles. They might experience things during the search stage that they weren't expecting, right? Things that that were more difficult than they could have imagined. Maybe leaving human trafficking would mean leaving their family, or more difficult, it might mean turning a family member into the authorities. Right? We've seen this all the time in the human trafficking space. It's easy to look at human trafficking and think, why wouldn't someone want out of that life? But there are oftentimes circumstances that are unseen that make people feel trapped in that life. So these circumstances, these unforeseen variables, are the challenges that you're going to want to communicate in step 4, or that search part of the story structure. In the next step, step 5, this is referred to Dan Harmon as find. The character finds what they are looking for, freedom from slavery, and they arrive at step 6, called take, where they get what they were looking for, right? They find what they are looking for, but they pay a heavy price. So maybe this individual did end up experiencing the challenges they were afraid of facing during the search stage. Maybe they did end up turning their family member in, and their family member is arrested in this story. Justice has been served, and clearly that's a good thing, but it's still painful, and it's a heavy price for the character to pay for their freedom. And then in step 7, we see the return. The character is able to rejoin a normal world without fear of being trafficked or enslaved. And then in step 8, the character has undergone and experienced significant change. So the character has changed so much, in fact, that for argument's sake, or for this example's sake, that in this example story, they decide they want to help your ministry go and find other characters and or other beneficiaries and help those characters experience the same freedom they now have. So they want to take you back to where they were trafficked so that your ministry can help mentor and guide other children out of the same life, or help you prosecute the traffickers and find justice. Now, that example story that I just walked us through is a pretty powerful story, right? And as I walked through this imaginary story, how many of you recognize similar patterns in the stories of transformation that are coming out of your work? How many of your ministries have similar stories to tell? A story like this is not a unique storyline, especially in the ministry space, because God is working to transform lives, just like that example character story. And God is doing it on a daily basis. He's rescuing people just like this by the thousands every single day. So I'm confident that every ministry has stories that fit into this structure. So we just need to tell those stories. And now you guys have a story structure to follow, so you can tell those stories more regularly. You can take a beneficiary story, ask the right questions in your interview, plug those answers into this structure or this filter, and you're going to come away with stories that are emotionally engaging and relate to audiences across cultures. This is a structure that's going to help you write down a story of transformation, fit it into this plug-and-play structure, and then send that content to ministry headquarters if you're a national partner, where that can then be repurposed into donor communication content and shared with the church. Now that you have this structure you can follow when you write your stories, let's look at some of the questions you can ask to get the right details from your character or your beneficiary, so that they give you the right information to fill out the hero's journey story structure. I'm going to break the interview questions down into acts, so you can see how anyone's story can be broken down into a 3-act story structure. So Act 1 is going to consist of 3 parts. We'll establish the character, define the problem, and introduce the mentor in this first act. We've developed a PDF that will walk you through the interview structure with sample questions. We'll link to that resource at the end of this course, or you can find it on our downloadable resources page on our website. This document will give you a good starting point for your interview questions, and it's going to serve as a guide as you enter into interviews with your beneficiaries. So let's walk through some of the example questions for each section of the story structure. So first, we want to establish the character. These questions should give the viewer or the listener or the reader a good understanding of this individual, this character, and their background. So what is their name? Where do they live? What was it like growing up? These questions are going to establish the character for the viewer and help them make a connection to the beneficiary. The next step in Act 1 is to establish the need or the problem. What's not right about this beneficiary story? This is where we want to get answers from the beneficiary that communicate the weight of the problem. We don't want to beat around the bush or tiptoe around the subject. These answers should have weight. And I've already communicated in this course and in other courses, but it's worth saying again. This is why it is so important that we start by getting permission from the beneficiary to tell their story, and why we need to take care and realize that asking these questions might bring up old trauma. So if you feel an interview will do damage to your beneficiary, then we got to find somebody else's story to tell. We don't want to exploit stories or hurt those that have experienced horrific things just to share something tragic or horrific with our audience. But if you do have permission, these answers are going to provide the emotional weight of the story. They're going to provide the conflict that can balance with the hope. And that's going to give these stories weight, and it's going to give them an emotional element that's going to engage our audiences. So questions like, how long were you trafficked? Did you ever think or dream of a way out? If you know the character accepted Christ through this process, you can also ask questions about their pre-Christ life at this point. So for instance, when did you start realizing something was missing in your life? The point of the state the problem questions is to pull the hardship from your character and show the conflict in this story. So as I've said before in other courses, without the conflict, and I said it here, without the conflict, the hope doesn't have as much weight. So we have to communicate that need. We have to communicate the problem. We have to communicate that conflict. And then finally, the last piece of Act 1 is introducing the mentor or your brand into the interview. So the mentor is going to call the character to adventure or call them to action. So we need to establish the mentor early in this structure, this story structure, so that they can call the character into the journey they're about to share. Questions like, when did you meet the ministry? How long have you worked with this ministry? What difference have you seen in your life since meeting the ministry? These are all great questions to start introducing the brand or the mentor into the storyline. Act 2 takes place in the unknown world. The character is going to accept the call to adventure in this act and go on a journey that will change their life forever. So the first part of this journey is called Go. This is the beginning of Act 2. And the character is going to answer the call to adventure given by the mentor. So in the example we've been using for this structure, your ministry is going to call the character out of human trafficking, right? And this stage is where they accept that call and they enter into an unknown world. So this is where the character says yes to your ministry's helping and walks with your ministry out of the life that they live in. You can ask questions like, how did the ministry impact your decision to leave the world of human trafficking? Or if the ministry came in and rescued, ask them to describe that process. What was that experience like? Even if the ministry is the one coming in and pulling the character from human trafficking or rescuing that individual from human trafficking, the character can still answer the call by going with your ministry when they come to help. So it doesn't have to be that they make a big statement and walk out of human trafficking on their own, they can be pulled out of that or rescued out of that. And just by accepting that call, that is a fulfillment of the call to adventure. And now we come to the search part, the find section and take sections of Act 2. So in our interview questions, this is the single step in Act. This is a single step in Act 2. But if you look at Dan Harmon's story circle, you notice that search, find, and take are 3 different steps in the story cycle or story circle. This can potentially be a big part of the character's story. So even though it only looks like a single step in our interview questions resource, make sure that you spend time on these questions and really dive down into a lot of questions around these 3 areas. This is where the meat of the character's story is going to take place. So this is often where secondary struggles or conflicts arise, and we don't want to avoid those pieces of the story because they help provide reality and depth to the story. So most stories are not, I came to Christ and my life turned out great, right? That's not usually the case. Or I was rescued from human trafficking and now my life is perfect. There are always struggles and challenges along the journey in any story. And this section is where we get to dive into those challenges that arise after the character made a significant change in their life. So how many believers have come to know Christ just to find that it's not a life is perfect now situation. Like there are struggles and sacrifices that come with becoming a believer. Especially in worlds or locations where there's a lot of hostility to the gospel. Accepting Christ can mean alienation from your family. And so those are the type of struggles that often come in this section of the character's story. Questions in this section might be, what struggles have you run into or come up against since following Christ? Or what sacrifices have you had to make in order to follow Jesus? Oftentimes people are outcast again from their families, their communities, for making decisions like this. And so these questions are designed to show that part of their story. And then lastly, we arrive at Act 3 and the final set of questions. So this set of questions is designed to show the hope and change in the life of the character or the subject. So how has their life transformed? How has life transformed been affected them to the point that they'll go and tell others or work to help others out of the same situation they were in? So if the character's story was about becoming a disciple of Christ, how are they going to go forward and make other disciples? If they came out of human trafficking, how are they going to help others out of that lifestyle? It could be that they show your ministry where their friends are being trafficked. It could be that they testify against their perpetrator. It could simply be telling their story. We want to be careful in this stage not to force an action on the character. If they don't want to revisit the world of human trafficking by showing your organization where their friends are being trafficked, that's okay, right? Simply telling their story is a heroic act. So do your research into how this character is going to help others and try not to force any ideas on them in the questions that you ask in this process. We want to be careful in this questioning process. So try to do as much research about the story before the actual interview. Questions like, will you go back and help others who are experiencing the same things you experienced? That can imply that the character has to do that or they should do that. And we don't want to imply that they need to take any action. But that can be a great question if you already know that they are going to show your ministry where they can find others who are being trafficked. So be careful with these questions. Develop your own that are specific to what you know about your character's story. So the resource that we have put together is a guide. It's a list of example questions for each act of this story, each section, the problem, the solutions, the results, the different steps within Dan Harmon's story circle. It's just a list of questions that give ideas of what could be asked. So make sure that you take these questions and make alterations to them specific to the story that is in front of you, because every story is going to be different. All right. And here is what the interview question structure looks like when everything is put together. Again, we're following this structure because everyone relates to the hero's journey, because it is a story structure that all humans live through. This structure is going to help you create engaging stories that relate to all peoples across all cultures, because it's the story structure of all of our lives. So take these questions as guidelines and make your own questions that fit into each of these categories. Again, the questions we've outlined in our interview questions PDF resource, they are not exhaustive questions. These can all be tweaked for your ministry and your beneficiary story. But the questions in the PDF are a great starting point and should provide a great guideline for crafting your own questions that are specific to each story that you tell. So make sure, again, go back, look at the questions, make sure that they are relevant to your character's story. And if you need to make adjustments, use these simply as a guideline, not as an exhaustive list of questions to ask. If you would like to download our free interview questions PDF, click on this button if you are viewing this as a presentation deck, or you can head over to reliantcreative.org and click on our downloadable resources page. You will find you will find this resource under the videography dropdown on that page. It's a free resource. Feel free to use it when you are learning how to craft stories and plug them into this hero journey story structure. And that is all I have for you guys today. These are some of the great resources supporting the content I've shared today, and some additional resources to kind of give you some additional research and insights into the power of video, the power of the hero's journey. We have linked to our interview questions PDF there at the bottom right on this page. So be sure to check out these resources to learn more about what we've discussed in this course. If you can start learning how to storytell better in your marketing and your communication, we are confident that it's going to lead to more support and more investment from your donors and the church. Take the time to learn how to storytell and communicate what God is doing through your ministry, and we believe your ministry will flourish because of it. So if at any point you have additional questions or need help telling your stories, or designing communication strategies or content that has purpose, engaging structure, we are always happy to help. This is what we do at Reliant. We're always looking for new ministry partners to partner with and support. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to learn about script writing and story structures with us at Reliant today. Please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. I've said this in every one of our courses. This is our ministry. This is the way we are using our skills, our talents, and our abilities for the kingdom. So please, 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 grant us the opportunity to pour into you so that we can help you guys tell the stories of how God is working around the world with greater efficiency and effectiveness. So again, thank you guys so much again, and don't hesitate to reach out.